Martin Va Harston. Gaelic translation is available at today's meeting. Please ensure that you have your headphones on if you require translation services. Martin Va agus fáiltaíomh go committee call agus puntstructor a ha gáil áte tron deomar seo agus tro Microsoft Teams. Denmh cíneach go bhfuil na microphones ach go bhé agus mistáiste sin ar sin é cháirliche Johnny McKeever ar treorach le fach golúrní agus a chuúneis go chláirich. Johnny?
Ar nehad taineh gon láirich danams gonnigicht a rioch. Has sin tar taingut is an harm seo uair eile bhí caiineach is an strechainú nacin. Gach cúideas an heomar an heagus leine cúideach gus has sin tar taingut is an necneolalas agus na huiman agus na comas an hautar gais an hacu seoir dói gain. Has sin gearig go mú cúise luchgobarach agin giléad van naar dafik as sias gaan nere siile. Hole danje ga fémal agus hole danje mat faartjen neskippe. Het jan ober meervallig gachla. Has een geer gemú am rastig is tardrijf teich agus njarst. Is an cogunie en dullig hech de jenwe gammen. Agus gemú gan niean voor droch vial agus droch seichen, vis a tachert voor faginnigel doial. Has een geer gemú na de chaverster an nein ha caig an naim seo. Ar stú chaverster na chaversteran. Hanil lánach sin cloidena fegin ha braun pa seichen dulich as na teoliche nachs na as na kaistach nachs na as an lochkoper nein lochkoper goru. Has sin gear gemúga. An chuidige tronne lachen tarach harop. Gemúga an hokale. Keinach an sonne het lachen ma. Be cwrws yn pwlwg doch slant ag yn naim sio. Gymwga am rostach ys gan o'r redasgo gos slantio fa. Sy'n gyharid ys mwyn chi adwystyn an i hogus. Edd grant cwydych gysgu. Gynnod y gaif niarst gyffaiad adasgo. Gos eich yma mad y fad agos gymiad na. Na'n cwydych ag na coesach yn ex gan na carad yn ex. Nobel ba had y fidian yw harna blionach yn. As is mwyn hedd lawn, cymru cwrws yn agos. Cymru gad cainach gost an de laichen yn nog, ma stig na droch laichen. Cainach orn hyn cwydych. Cymru sian sych y ffandwrin i gra. Gan chwys mi rŵn malsgach cwrs yn hierne môr ag yna. Agos gyda ha ymach i fi cainach ag fain ha bron san sych yn dwlich ha. Cwydych ma fi cainach i rwten tolig ha tachart cwydych. Sashin could melan eich taramad donlach agus Christine fós wach yn garid sashin. Gwy imedach bli on y son lechiele. Heid rwy'n yn ys agus cwydych sy'n dian sy'n fo beith dolamach y lechiele. Cwydych sy'n hyn cogwnion fys com ma na dyn hasyn i siorwch gach. Bor o'r ornish go cion farai agus y hwle hata adara. Gleag stian sy'n smagin ar pechlan. Nes gach riast. Amen.
Dag Johnny. An y dain fi stiwdyn y cwnio chwydyn na'r lenys na yr cwynia. Mae hasef na'r sbailt yn chometi agos y ffdielwch drwy computer fag yr camera eid agos yr microphone ie. Mae ha offegyd yn y ffdielwch drwy computer fag of ie an da chwyd mae'r eilsef a byn di asg no ffigwrs cysht. Chwydyn yn gyn y bwyl agos offegyd yn gyfel system ffews yn diawmar. A smach y cycharych yn y mics. A mic y hyd yn y ffew a bwysg y gwania agos bu yn gor gwania yn stad. A nwy y licas yn garych y stwy mic arich a mic o derag. Cha fi ach da fag eich derag ag yn nhw'n mawn. Mae ha eisiau ferson tilwg y cysht fag o fy'n mic eid agos mae ha offegyd yn y byn i as chorlich yn oef a nhw rwt y gianw. Agus cwtioch gen nhw cyndiach gyfel sef y byn ystod yn y mic sorg a dwlet y swydd yn ac na hun yn ymwf a ysglwyn also cwtioch al na dianw siw sianach byn ystod yn mic. Nes tig pianfachas a horsta bhúil a chomedy, a hwf clarín úd fémi bhúil an deamaragal no ciach a chuide in geal. Cynnig go bhfuil a chuine go chláir agus an deuna cúniu dheo lárach lín a corn. Cwsbyr y deich ag al yn y niamar ag dydyn y cwniw agus mystach y sien hyd i'r lwch comparst a hylig eid an noffig yd ymach chi agus bwyl a chwniw ag. Nes gwrs ysyn chwn y cwsbyr yn eid y chlar, ger chwndys yn agus chiad ger chwndys na cwniw eid ger o la diag na nog fi as 2003 edichyd. Agus y sien ysyn undach ag fel siw gyndach ag ha tachblyf. Alla cwsbyr ger chwndys cwniw comedy corlachi pwstar na ylen Siar eid yn siachgola ffychyd gynog fi as 2003 edichyd agus y sien ysyn fistrach ag. Dres cwsbyr ger chwndys cwniw bwyan wy asiacan eisiau gael yn lwgola ffychyd gynog fi as 2003 edichyd agus y sien ysyn fistrach ag cwydach. Ger y cwsbyr clar ag wyd. Na wy ag bwyl yn y gwsbyr sy'n mi yn chlar obrwch chorgaif sy'n y chlar ag. Fe gael ffil mal yn eisiau bwyl yn dyfer eid a fel at y chlar ag wys y chwsbyr. I'r yn eich bwyl sy'n diawmar sy'n ag ianw yn drast y lefi a cwyd eid o'r microphone no'r teams lefi a clech gyda yn bwchtol o laf. Dyn nhw cynioch gyfel sy'n cynamach ag diest ron chwsbyr ymach chi agus gyfel sy'n fel lental yn glech gymar a chaya finnioch i'r oen. Wel, dyn nhw chlar ag wys. Neil, oké, tachbelig. Goke kusper boi een oproch bouw offigheid in haske aan roodjen. Van als je de gunt is stressen is boi een oproch bouw offigheid in haske aan roodjen en zo je boeil en je boi een oproch. Mooi boi een oproch bouw offigheid hik en garich agus en hier garich en zo je geska en driaken agus a Derek McCuy agus Colin McCunnich. Sure, son pín is an áisk. Derek, dus het daar zo?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing much to add to the report. This was requested. This MOG was requested at the last series of meetings, and we are suggesting that the remit cover all roads policies, and specifically the roads asset management policy, the road asset management plan, and winter maintenance policy. The group will not be looking at operational matters. She'll be at the more strategic level with a view to making recommendations back to the parent committee. And obviously, just to remind members, a member officer working group is not a decision-making body. It's an opportunity for members to consider matters in a more informal environment with a view to making recommendations back to the parent committee. In terms of membership as well, we do suggest that the membership of member officer working groups is not too large. Probably 7 members, a maximum of 7 would be an optimum amount, and members may wish to ensure geographic coverage across the islands. Happy to take any questions.
Geestig dinge, Derek. Lust is on dat er aan galm.
Ben je al cheers dat blijft?
Camera COVID.
Falk in de schade is. Dat blijft.
Right, we'll shoot. Could you yours doing this on a member officer working group? Have you an opera show? Sugar Hallam. We told you, John Norman. We'll tell you quite nice to column. Johnny, quite nice to column. Shoot, doing this, truth come back, cut some on the road, and you like.
Can I nominate Councillor Donald Crichton?
Donald, we'll tell you to Seconder.
I'll second
Oh, you okay? Gentia, second. Ian. Dorlichter. Seconder. Mustafa. Sugar Hallam.
Can I nominate a second person? Norman MacDonald, Misty here.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Ronald, ja. Hoe weet je het? Hem is dat. En Anela. Ian.
And I nominate Councillor Ian MacLeod.
A mis búideach gan mis son ha Ian vi kan na chéar go an bháin so ach ha mi at son kan the geographic spread in seo so a tí is ac yn oes mar ha. A mi túlig chi ein. Wyt ti'n gynnes na hereg, ai.
So my para ya misha.
Eisem. Os na grodi is ac yn oes, dim hat os by gwma farag. Sieg y gon,
Meisje Fulton, in Ashley plus one.
ai. Seconder. Johnny. 7
It is, yeah.
Ní seach gur leis farich is an íar farich derig. Ní sinna bheith years.
Well, we're suggesting up to 7, including the chair and the vice chair. So I
Okay.
think that's
Sin
7.
ac yn nes. Wel geographic spread ac yn siŵr.
From sort of north of the island, nice store away.
O rai.
Possibly, so maybe if they're happy with that, it's.
Mae eisiau tolig til eisiau sian chan i'r dyniac yn na satio tŵa colwch.
I know, sorry.
Chan i'r lw cwtr yma chyti son o'ch lwa nis, febi. Oce, am ysgol sy'n tolig ti golewr, fel? Glifa. A dwi'n cybyg siŵl o gysabed i'r son pys e eisiau o chachan. Gwrs sy'n yn est gobors dy cali yn ha, yn gwsbyr y lenys fy choedd na comedi i'r sgad lesnus yn fawr dy cali yn. Chwy'n yn gyn y bwyl gyfel na hawn yn ffasgu fy gyda diafar. Bech sy'n ei ddynasg son olas ach, mae ha cysd yn cychiawl ti di na ffasgu fi yn glwys sy'n cyfi yn diafar. Agus, cynnych ysio to fi'n ysio nasg, chynnych.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, report is as it is, and I will of course take questions on it. I would add just one point in regards to the executive summary of the latest report from the designated person, and just highlight that as he's called for is that we would benefit from extra staffing, and I think, yeah, this has come from every internal and external audit that we've had over the last 10 years or so, but I think we all know where the position the call is in terms of finances, so it's a difficult position, but he does identify that this and extra staffing would provide at least 3 visits per year to every facility, but I think that's a bit, I think every facility we have gets at least 3 visits a year already, and I think what we can do is, in terms of when either us or our peer ops are visiting the harbours, is that we have more engagement with the users, or that it's not just a case of anybody just turning up, having a look and but having real proper engagement with the users. So I think that would improve the kind of that side of it, or that the users would feel that they've kind of listened to. Happy to take questions on any part of that report.
Oce, tak brad chynnych i weld cysdeg dyn ys y byd y chynnych. Chynnyr, weld bwyl a gyndach ag anawys gorst och ar ook bym y tyfyd na skipelt yn y sienna.
Díadacha Comhairle dord fan rud a cynnych y grasid. Gyharad i cwant i ywst agus barau far a fel dyn iawn o'n am haarstúne. Agus na di challas sy'n gyharad yn y hwst yn y hawnt chichen. Lach di atchan agus dyn y paarstúne iawn. Agus na di challas sy'n gyharad gyrawn an as de Callan agus an mearn de gomóde waar in de bekuant dus de as naast de hacking agus rot wat kun je gegra zullen mi al nuus gehaal ik me had dunje paar stuun kun me ga immer fine mag kun je ha go es na ha skiden as schon ha fudig an nuus dan uit dan de mark han je luie dan de mark ik ja de hand paar stuun gal aan agus gehaal het kwart de wachter zo agus art Venus schon na hies trang hadden mark agus zullen mi geld mark de sasse kwantisch ach je uist as nafen joch geganning se jemisch kwantisch aan de mark kleine die kun je ha nunje a paar stunie dort chemisch en gieren maar ha kra wel joonje de wie huis tu laas in jacht kon na paar stuunies in jacht kon es se wian agus een oor schon ik ges schon huis gepeende keer aan na je na uist gehaal het agus na hound te gieren zullen me gefirmers kwant gemindetjoch die uist dus as dort
Ha dunne nuist en waar nu den ge. Hele gunnig. En je paar.
wat toen anders een paar stunie
Hij waar nu. Je geest hem te ra als je niet hokker. Dus zo'n tien as gunnig.
Ha. A fiach me as a guard. Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, as you said, we have got a full-time officer or peer up in Uist. I mean, it did formerly used to be a Lochmaddy peer up, quite a lot dealing with the ferry operations, but that's moved on to Calmac now in terms of all the ferry arrivals and departures. So he does go round all our piers, and that's, I think, he goes round each week. I think Uist and Barra are probably a lot better off than Lewis and Harris in terms of getting the visits done, because Barra gets every port gets a visit every day that he's around, because it's easy enough for him to get round them. And Uist is the same, as that he gets round. But I think, as I've said already, it is in terms of the engagement when he gets round. So I think that's something we will work on, and I think to improve things with the users.
Dus zo'n tien as hij ma eigen gefieltig zou in huis die helemaal.
Wel, wat misschien merk ik ja nu schon wat doen kan nu een paar stunie haast. Die leen vijf kroatje te lochten matten. Ach, zullen we maar ha laan union dus kel. Toen manager die ha leerkasend tot de ster. Agus gehaald gelisig deunje. Gevingens brocht dat systeem had ik in. Het door je gesig deunje. Kun je vegan en je verraad. Zo'n zullen we maar ha dan je laan union dus code ke. Agus je keer aan dat zo. Toen ik was aan de tien. Agus gevingens man gewoon kel deunje kelet bestuurd te haten raad.
Maar is hem te ra hem heen en ik ken een chene. Je mag eens als je niet dokter. A we is toch die shit ga niet jij was bij je toe de goede taal.
Amige is ja.
Klima, ze wordt puile kundige die aanschouwt wanneer. Klima, hoe is het in Eske kusper zeg? Skemmig in tian we hulten, komen ze koertje. En als je dat visserige Comhairle die koersen skemmen tian we hulten en gespooi. Komen ze skemmig in koers te hun en creëert zijn halve. Nini kallen me gunnig zo'n aas is fiktie kisten ze bij. Allem.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this report is coming before members, mainly due to the Scottish Government's funding review of Cycle 1 flood prevention schemes. So the Comhairle was successful in Cycle 1 in securing approximately £2 million for the South Ford scheme. Now, the South Ford has been difficult to progress, as many of you probably know. There's been complicated modelling and survey work that's been difficult to get completed, and the environmental impact screening indicates some significant considerations with the proposals, especially around the Goulin Island and Loch B areas. So there's quite a lot of interaction there between the way that the coast is moving. The elements of the work for the South Ford scheme being the Golan Island recharge, the Lenaclate dune stabilisation and the Lenaclate flood bund, are all still important aspects for us to look at in that area. So the recommendations would be to go back to Scottish Government based on the recommendations that we may not be able to meet some of these timescales, that we have that discussion with them specifically to do with the complications of South Ford and the environmental considerations. So the recommendations there, Chair, at 3.1, which I'm happy to take questions on if they need some further explanation.
Apple de chynnig efo'r cystion ag dyn sy'n byd de chynnig dy Michael ein lasg sio. En je me fechtjen solas is. Maar wel boeile kundig in de mollen ag 3 pwynt hun. Ja, Apple. Oes is nie nest gos skutel. Buisjen lentenich naderach. A náis go sidig bechgach roiin is son curas do garnish te. Sa bhfuil puisinin lentanach nátara agus bíní David McLeod is an náis agus fixi Christian Sabine. Sheikh David.
Thank you, Chair. This is a piece of legislation that dates back to 2007. It's UN legislation on persistent organic pollutions, chemicals really that things like, historically things like DDT, pesticides, in this case it's flame retardants that were used in furniture. The legislation is very high level in that it's UN sign up rather than a UK piece of legislation or even EU legislation. So the UK government have signed up to it. The Environment Agency carried out some research into the levels in furnishing, and that provided evidence that it exceeded safe limits at point of disposal. So hence the need for a different disposal route. Paragraph 6.4 gives a list of the type of materials that are included, that are in scope of this legislation. To me, it's very unfortunate. The legislation, when it was written, I don't believe it was designed for this kind of waste or this kind of treated waste, but it's very specific about the disposal routes, and it specifically bans landfill as a disposal route, which for us is a challenge because that is our only real disposal route for waste locally. The difficulty that we have in terms of looking at how to deal with this, for material that we collect, we are going to have to send it to the mainland for disposal by energy from waste. We do have an option to combine our loads with Highland, and ultimately they're looking at putting in shredding equipment at some of their waste transfer stations, and we can use that and try and reduce bulk of material going further south. If you look at paragraph 2.4 on the executive summary, and it's also recommendation B on the list, we're looking to suspend for a short time the community skip service to allow us partly to take a break and reinforce the message to the groups that are looking at it, and also to look at how we manage the stock of skips we've got, because we're going to have to provide separate storage at all our household waste recycling centres for this material. We've got to collect it separately, we've got to keep it separate, and we've got to send it away separately. The guidance on contamination, or basically the guidance from SEPA hasn't been published yet, although we've seen the draft. The element on contamination is quite difficult to deal with, in that we are allowed to take a whole sofa out of the waste if it comes in, but if a cushion is burst and there's foam everywhere, or if it's bean bags are covered because they're full of polished iron beads that have been treated, if that is spread around the load, then we've got to send everything that's in the skip away to the mainland for energy from waste disposal. I had estimated in the 7.3, what I would expect the cost to be. We've now got a bit of clarity on gate fees, and Energy from Waste plant have basically doubled the gate fees for this material because they've got restrictions on how they handle both the waste and anything that they would normally recover as recyclable as part of their front end process. That now has to go into the Energy from Waste plant as well. So they're looking at much higher costs. So I think to give us a chance to get that message across and make sure that we've engaged properly with the community groups who are managing community skips at the moment, that's why the recommendation is to suspend community skip services from the 1st of October. We will bring back another report to the November series just to explain what we're going to do going forward. By that time, the guidance will have been published and we'll know exactly where we are. We'll also have to have a review of the bulk uplift charges because we're not allowed to co-collect materials. Happy to take any questions. I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of questions, but happy to take questions on this.
Absolute gobsmacked. Ronald.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, David, for that report. I'd just like to say I have my reservations regarding the temporary suspension of this invaluable service. Needless to say, these facilities provide an indispensable amenity to our rural communities. In the ward in which I, Norman Misty, represent, we have the ward of Carloway. We have 4 such facilities, each of whom are manned for the designated 2 hours they are opened every week. Now, I would be concerned that if we temporarily close these sites, it would encourage potentially a clandestine approach by some households and individuals to recycling, which in turn could significantly have cost implications to the Comhairle. I refer to fly tipping and the like. So I wonder if I could ask David, would these community-run facilities be duly covered in terms of due diligence and adherence to these new requirements by SEPA, by the certitude that they are manned? Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Chair. The issue isn't really about whether they're managed properly. It's the risk to the Comhairle if they're not. At the moment, it costs us roughly we basically only have to pay the landfill tax because it's going to our own landfill cell. If we're, if we've got, let's say we've got 3.5 tons of material, that's going to cost us roughly about £350 in money on our revenue budget. If we end up having to send that to the mainland, it could be anything up to 4 times that, and that's the risk at the moment, particularly in the current financial climate. We really need to guarantee that we don't have the skip left open while somebody's gone to have a coffee or whatever. If it's a licensed site, we know that it's manned, and we know it's manned to a particular standard, and we're in control of that. When it's out in the community, it's a bit more difficult to manage, and that's why I think we need to really make that 100% clear to the groups that are doing it. We don't want them to feel that they're under any additional pressure, but equally, we've got to realise, get it across that they realise the importance of manning these skips at all times. And it's very easy to say if somebody comes along with a cushion, just throw it in. But our trained staff know that that's not the case. So that's the reason for having a break. Plus, as I said, we are going to have to put at least 1 skip at every household waste recycling centre, and we don't have spare skips at the moment. So we're going to have to look at what we've got left and how we manage that.
Ronald, will you carry Ronald?
Yeah, just one other supplementary. So the temporary suspension, do you have any idea as to a timeline, how long this suspension will last and how long it'll take your department to carry out the adaptations to satisfy these new requirements?
Well, we'd be looking to come back the November series with a proposal and hopefully have something back in place. It might not be as comprehensive as we have just now, but we look to have something back in place after the November series.
David.
Thank you, Chair.
We can try and do it a bit quicker than that. If there's no decision required, then it's just operational. Then we can try and do it a bit quicker than that.
Okay. Ian MacLeod.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think Councillor Fraser said most of what I was going to say along the same lines, but I'll be seeing incidents now of these control skips coming in with stuff in them that shouldn't be in them. Yeah, because if we're not, we should be comfortable enough that they will continue to do as we tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think long term, yes, people will start fly tipping if we're not going to have the skips out. They're very important in the community, so I think I don't want to sound too cheeky, but I think there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to it, to the new legislation, and we should maybe look at it closer at how we can manage it.
David, who's on Tilligus, knee-jerk?
I think the problem is the risk to the Comhairle that we're going to end up with huge bills if we don't do this. We don't establish that this is a new requirement. What makes it doubly difficult is that most of the items of controlled waste that we don't allow into the community skip service are obviously not household in nature. This is what we're all sitting on basically, and people don't really expect that to be hazardous in any way or to be at risk, and it's quite clearly household waste. So it's going to be quite a challenge to get that message across, and that's why that plus we do need to look at how we can make use of the number of skips that we've got available to us going forward.
Johnny?
The situation in Tulsa is it's policed to such an extent it would be easier to steal the crown jewels than to put something that's not permitted into that skip. So I don't see there'd be a problem down there. One thing I would say, if you don't do it before November, we're going to have some bonfires, some big size of bonfires and all over the island to get rid of these sofas and stuff that you're not going to permit to put into skips.
Yeah. Mustafa, unless John Owen is there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for the report. I must say, not a good idea. I don't think it is. It's not good. And as for fly tipping, it'll happen in the short term, not the longer term. Now, why don't we give community groups at least the chance and have them all manned? I know there's one up our route. It's not manned, but you have to get a particular key from someone. But at least give them the chance. If it's not working, then fair enough. But we have to make them aware that you are not allowed to put certain things in. So I think we have to give them the chance. We can't suspend the skips from October. Now, I'm talking from our own ward, same as the Swan, etc., etc. They're well used and it's a good service. You see. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the issue is the risk of costs. If we're talking about £3,000 to £4,000 to dispose of a skip load of waste that would be a few hundred, then that's going to come out of the budget, and if that comes out of the budget, then there's no slack anymore. Also, the management groups, some of them are very good, and they're all doing their best and they're all compliant, but it is volunteers and it's whoever's, quite often it's whoever's available on the day. We wouldn't want to put that risk onto anybody else, so we take that risk, but it could be fairly significant.
Staffa?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, considering obviously the financial implication that will happen and the risk, how are we informing the community? What have we done? Have we you know, because this is going to be a new introduction, and we've been liaising with, I mean, like, I know in US there is Quorum, they have an organization that collect old furnitures from people and restore them and throw quite a lot of old ones. Is there been any liaison with any of these organizations, or are we planning to inform the community in terms of leaflets or things?
David?
At this stage, well, there's no restriction on reuse of second-hand material. I'm not aware of how much we get in terms of waste furniture from the likes of Coram, but we can look at that. We've got a letter ready to go out to all the community groups that manage the skips. So that side of it is ready to go once we know what the decision is.
Is that going specifically just to groups that manage the skips, or is it?
Yeah, but we will do a press release and follow up.
It's a wider community, because I mean, it's just as the implication of the POP in general. It's not just this organization. So obviously,
the guidance, CPER guidance, isn't out yet. So I think once that's out, then that would be the reasonably the time where you would you'd advertise these are the requirements. This is what you have to do with it. At the moment, it's only in draft. It's only been circulated to the Waste Managers Network in Scotland. It hasn't gone beyond that, but technically the material is already banned from landfill. As soon as it was identified, it was banned from landfill. But the guidance is what governs the enforcement of that ban. So we have a bit of time. What we have been doing over the last while is trying to make sure that we get the skips emptied. So just so anything that's been put in inadvertently, we'll make sure that all the skips are emptied before the end of this month.
I think it's just to make people aware, especially when you mentioned the cross contamination. If there is a small thing that the whole skip has to be sent, I think it's important that people are aware that even with inadvertently not to do something that they wouldn't have planned to do. So thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really to reiterate what especially Johnny said there. We've got a community skip in Cheshire, which is very well policed. I think it's open for 2 hours on a Saturday, and it's going to be a bit of a kind of a shock to them to hear this news that their skip has been taken away without any sort of prior warning. I think that we could have maybe had discussions with the communities before we made this decision. Well, I understand the financial implications, but I think it's just to just hit them with this all of a sudden and tell them, well, there's going to be no more skips, and we can't guarantee when these skips are going to be available again. And there's something else that my colleague was talking about there. What if someone puts a beanbag or something into one of the recycling bins and it goes into the back of the lorry? What happens then?
If it's a blue bin, it's a different bit of legislation, I have to say, in Scotland. I don't write the legislation, so we wouldn't want that to happen. But there are some strange things the way they're written. I mean, if I go back to the very start, my own personal opinion is that this legislation was designed for drums or chemicals, not for items of furniture that have been treated that may have, it may have a high level of chemicals in the foam or below the fabric. For us with a modern, well-designed landfill, the chances of that these pops leaking out into the surrounding environment are almost nil. So it doesn't seem technically sensible to demand that we send it to energy from waste. But unfortunately, because of the way the legislation is sitting at UN level, it's almost impossible to even think about getting any kind of derogation, because it's not something that either the Scottish Government or the UK Government can give. So I think we're kind of stuck with it and trying to work around it the best way we can.
Would you get on I feel like Ash, Malcolm? David, is leap show nationally. Up his comedy court in early CPAS world.
Yeah, it's thanks for that, David. Yeah, it's just hard to understand that, you know, the way that works. That on one hand it seems to be kind of okay, on the other side of things it isn't. But yeah, I think we'll have to have discussions with the local groups and make sure that these community skips are in place, because like Forax and Johnny were saying, there will be fly tipping. That's for sure. If these skips are not going to be in place, we're going to end up with a problem. I can see that happening. Yeah, we've got it ready to go, so we will get information out. And as I said, we will look to reinstate as best we can, as quickly as we can. But I think we need to really emphasise that there is this is something that they have to take seriously, and just continuing as we go, you know, you just don't get that impact.
Malcolm.
David, just another aspect to it, special collections. You're going to have a mixture of things. That means the operatives will have to sort out things that are, you know, a sofa from you know, something that's metallic, etc. That's going to be have cost implications as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's probably less of an impact in the town area, because there's enough demand for us to manage it in a way that we can just go out and collect anything that's within the scope of these types of material. Where it does have an impact on us is out in the rural areas, where we would normally send a pickup out, and whenever, you know, ideally we'd have it full coming back. Wardrobe and a washing machine and something like that, one trip, and then the next day you're going out collecting a 3-piece suite. Yeah. So it is going to have an impact, and we will look at the how that impacts on our costs, probably for next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't want to go. I echo what my colleagues have said before me. You know, taking away a community skip is, we've lost them in some areas with a 14-mile radius before, but now we're going into another sphere of removal from remote areas. And I am concerned there could be fly tipping, but my concern is the timing of this. You know, we're not giving people much time. The 1st of October is just around the corner. And a lot of these community skips are organised by community councils, and the community councils are actually coming up for re-election at the moment. So a lot of the members from the current community councils might not be involved in a month's time. So I don't know if we've factored that into the equation, because that could have an impact in certain areas. I know in the Lochs area, the Gravis skip, for instance, is run by community council, by members of the community council. They may be going to carry on that service, but you know, I don't know if we factored this in. But the timeline is very, very tight. I think we should have maybe given them more time to factor through. And the other point I was going to ask Mr. MacLeod is, it's an opportunity here for third-party skip operators to. I know the cost implication to the council's been covered, but is there an opportunity maybe for third party to help with the cost of this?
David,
in terms of third-party skip operators, they're bound by the same legislation as we are. You know, they will have to find their route for disposal, and if they put out a mixed skip and somebody throws a sofa in it, then they can't take it to Benidorm. You know, so that's you know, SEPA will be informing them of that as a licensed waste. You know, if you are dealing with skip hire, we have been lobbying Scottish Government for additional funding for this. Normally, when there's a change in legislation, then Scottish Government, particularly Scottish Government legislation, then there's an obligation to fund what the additional costs are. In this case, it's a wee bit difficult because it's not Scottish legislation. It's not even UK legislation, as I said, although it's been signed up to by UK government. There's also very little chance of getting money from the manufacturers, because it's very difficult to actually identify the majority of this type of material, you know, where it's come from, who the manufacturer is at time of disposal. So that the chances of getting anything out of any sort of producer responsibility fund is also pretty slim this time. You know, previously our waste electricals, that's funded from the manufacturers. There is packaging legislation going through just now that ultimately will get additional funding for packaging, recycling and disposal. But this is so historic and so hard to determine who the manufacturer is that they don't think they'll be able to do anything going back the way. And going forward, the chemicals being used are no longer in the list. So I think from 2019, anything manufactured after that is unlikely to contain, no guarantee, but it's unlikely to contain these materials.
No, so something, yeah.
On the other point, sort of community councils and timeline. That's all.
The timeline has really been driven by, for us, by SEPA saying that once this guidance is out, you have to abide by it. And they initially were going to bring the guidance out at the end of August and enforce the ban on landfill by then. They have told us numerous occasions that the ban is in place, but the guidance isn't out yet, and they're talking about the end of September being the publication of the guidance, and that's really what's driven this for us at the moment. And that's why we really want to get skips in and emptied, and ideally, you know, once we know what the decision is on this, then we can go forward on that manner.
Solo secretary gerste jonge Rosan.
Wel, zo'n tiedachtel goinig maar in de beanbags was zo de lijn van mijn kwant gereed vergaan tot een kwant die missen genoten gehaald. Listen, she Gamaga, een kudu tuga vergaan in je land schoolbek en hij te wel. Dus we waren telefoon lari. She gehaald ne alles in pekkenhond, dus geskapen. If lari, dus kan ik in je gat miljoens bij kost gestoren, dan wat er je nu spisen de lari kilies. Schöne route. Maar misschien kunnen we gehaald, of waar ik de route naar een moord aan een punt, schiapuntje keert. Jullie zeggen she ne beanbag session gehaald, dus toch kussen de sleur maar skutelt na stuwen na schant ha de janu truolig maar ha dan tugus schöne me kwat tot ha tegen de janu in ocean en hoe dat kan geverjoschen daar schon a shotje a steiga en je wat is schön voor was je klein in geran maar je voelus schos skutlebat janu ahrige geet is de meer zo'n galap haar verder heen kunnen schön so niet charlotelletien agus zullen me gefinch de woordboog gra haar shotje in cool veert als in je vaatklacht de rodelle.
David?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This legislation is at the moment and the guidance is primarily focused on bulky waste collections and the big stuff, which the scope includes all of these different materials. It's not looking at what, at this stage, not looking at what goes into the wheelie bins at houses. If it comes to that, then we'll just have to deal with that. I mean, it's, but at the moment, that's what the focus is on, and you know, that's what our biggest concern is.
Noel.
It does seem a bit harsh, Chairman, that there would be an abrupt suspension because of this piece of legislation. And given that, you know, if I'm correct, most of our skips are manned and opened at particular times, surely that the public could be instructed to take the material that is banned now to recycling centres to be disposed of there, rather than, you know, this outright suspension. Could there not be some sort of compromise where public are given guidance on what can and cannot be disposed of at the community skips, and therefore utilising the recycling centres more than are being at the moment.
David?
Or am I getting it completely wrong? I don't know.
No, thank you. The ideally that would be the case. I think what is the concern is that these are, as I said earlier, these are items of sort of run-of-the-mill household waste, and it's getting a guarantee that that's, you know, that is the route that they'll take for disposal. I mean, I think we can probably get the message out that, you know, three-piece suites and sofas, but, you know, then it goes down to a headboard that, well, that's not the same thing, so that can go in, you know, but that's not the case. So it's getting a guarantee that we don't end up with a financial liability of having to send skip loads of waste away to the mainland for incineration, which is what would happen just now. You know, we've realised the reason, as I said earlier, the reason for the deadline is that we have legislation or guidance that's coming out that's going to enforce this legislation at the end of this month. And that's really just to give us some sort of surety that we're not going to need to do that, to have to send stuff away.
So would it be okay for me to take a sofa directly to the recycling centre at Cleat Park?
Yes,
that would be okay.
Once we've got, see, as I said, we don't actually have spare skips at the moment, so we're going to have to look at the number of skips we've got out and how we're going to manage that. So we have a skip just for these materials. So we'll have to have a designated skip at Creed, at Uriga, at Harburst, at Garrigal, and at Market Stand.
So whoever is manning the skips in the local communities can be given guidance, surely,
yes,
to people coming and say, you can't dump this here, you have to go to Creed Park.
Yeah.
I mean, that's surely more of a compromise at the moment than, you know, an abrupt suspension of the whole service. Could we not try that initially to see
if there's a means of trialing that financial risk, then that would be okay.
Norman. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything what Don was saying there. I think we should give it a bash. I mean, give it a trial anyway. I mean, is it going to cost us a lot for, say, a month's trial, and if a skip was contaminated? What kind of money are we talking, David? Are we talking hundreds or are we talking thousands? I just feel as if it's too soon.
About £3,000 compared to about £300.
No, is that per skip?
Per skip.
Yeah. Should we not just give the community the chance? I think we should anyway. I wouldn't be happy with recommendations and be suspending the skip, because if I went home tonight, I'd be hung. Okay, thank you.
David, er is something you should we're cutting in your course at Mobile Villa. Callum, Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. It's a shame that we're losing skips for a sofa, you know, in one sense. But I fully realise, David, the problems that you are in regards to legislation. We're driven, our entire lives are being driven by legislation, and it's becoming more and more difficult, particularly in Uline when it comes to the green cemetery that is just taking over our country. But surely there is a way forward, as Donald Crichton said here, is actually to enable these items, because there's probably more than sofas apparently in with POPs, of isolating these, of taking them out of the skips, has already been highlighted. But there's one thing that I see that getting rid of persistent organic pollutants is by incineration. That is the way that will happen on the mainland. Have we ever looked at getting an incinerator at Creed Park? Is it a possibility? I'm just putting that forward because it is a way that if we had an incinerator up there, that would take an awful lot of cost away from us, would it?
David?
It's just not financially viable. It would be too small. It would be too expensive to run. You'd be talking about maybe 60, 70 million pounds investment. You'd also have there'd be a requirement to have some form of district heating. Shetland's energy waste plant was built around about 2004 or 5. It cost, with the district heating system, was close on 30 million. The Aberdeen, Murray and Aberdeenshire collaborated to build an energy and waste plant in Aberdeen. And the reason for that was that individually, none of these conurbations were big enough to get the size of energy from waste plant that met the economies of scale requirements to make it worthwhile in terms of finance. But together as a group, they were able to do that. Highland are looking at potentially having an energy from waste plant. They're sending their stuff down to the central belt for incineration. And what they've said to us, if we ever build one and it's still a NIV, it's very unlikely that we would be able to offer you, because it's too small, that we were able to offer you a price that makes it worth stopping at Inverness, or you'd be as well just going down to the central belt where the bigger ones are. And that's unfortunate. That's the economics of it, but it's to do with, you know, the way that the requirements of clean burn, etc.
Yeah, I just see that. Yeah, I realise that obviously you can't get a scaled down version of an incinerator, but the other one I'm seeing, I've been noticing some of other authorities are actually putting in a skip for the likes of all the items with POPs, persistent organic pollutants in it. They're putting skips aside. You talk about that, and I think Don Crichton mentioned that would be a possibility for us, so that we could just have that out at Creed Park, so that people could go out and retain the skips in the communities, but put a ban upon putting anything like that, as we are already with white goods. So maybe that's a way forward.
I think that's really what we'd like to do. We're a wee bit. We don't have any spare skips at the moment. We bought a reasonable amount, or we had a reasonable amount of money put aside for skips, but they've doubled in price since pre-COVID. They're now about, you know, used to, if you had 100,000, you could get 20 skips. Now you get 10. And you know, so we don't have any spare ones, so we're going to have to take some out and look at what's left and how we divide that amongst the areas that are still looking for a provision, the more remote rural areas where we'd like to put a skip out.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, is it possible to put another recommendation, or to reword recommendation B at 3.1? And I'm looking to Mr. Mackay here for guidance, so we could do something to, rather than stop it so brutal as the 1st of October, that after following consultation with community groups, make them aware of what is going to happen, and if they're not careful what they are putting into the skips, that they will be withdrawn a bit further down the line. You know, I think what sticks in my throat really is the suddenness of removal of these community skips. You know, that's what I feel is going to cause, you know, quite a lot of, it's going to put extra effort on to Mr. Campbell's team, because we're going to end up with all kinds of soft furnishings dumped on side roads and feet roads in the rural areas. You know, if it's not monitored properly. I just feel we need to give people a wee bit more time, and I would like maybe that recommendation reworded to allow that if possible.
David, you have Diano?
Yeah, it can be done. As I said, the reason for us not recommending that is the financial risk. I don't have a budget for. I mean, I don't have a budget for sending the furnishings that we collect to the mainland, but to also have to send, you know, the contents of skips to the mainland for incineration, would be a big hit for us. But I'm happy to, if that's the decision of the committee, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate what you're saying, but again, if I take a sofa to Creed Park, what happens to it?
It'll be sent out by lorry to probably initially to Inverness because of our agreement with Highland Council, so that it can go with theirs to wherever they're sending it for energy from waste. But it would have to be separate all the way along. Whereas if it goes into a mixed skip, there is a significant risk that everything in that mixed skip would have to go as well. And not only would that be more expensive because it's not the system at the other end will be ready to accept soft furnishings, and you're sending a mixed load of could be anything. So it's going to be even more expensive per ton for us to do that.
So are you saying there's no spare capacity at the moment that would take that sofa away in terms of skips?
We don't have, all the skips that are out at Creed are used, so they're all designated for a specific item. We're going to have to put another skip in that's for soft furnishings, and it'll have to be a closed skip.
Right, then you should be a few you can't the 31B Derek over
Specific wording.
specific word.
I don't want to put Mr. MacLeod on the spot, but it would really be for Mr. MacLeod to give us wording that would minimise the risk to the service. So I'm really looking to Mr. MacLeod for.
Yeah, well, I'm. If it's the wish of the committee, I'm happy to change it and maybe add an extra month. But we will have to make sure that the community groups are aware. There will also be potentially some disruption to service because we will have to take some skips back in. There are some clusters of them that we will look at and see whether we can manage that better.
Can we have something in there perhaps about issuing fresh guidance to community groups about what can be disposed and what can't be disposed, and in an effort to minimise the financial risk, that we have a review and monitor it and report back to the November series?
Yep, happy to do that. I can
just to see how it goes. If there's publicity put out immediately, people are aware, and review it in November.
Yeah, as I said, the guidance isn't out yet. That's why we're trying to preempt because once the guidance comes out, the door is shut on how much flexibility we have on this. But we're happy to engage with community groups. But I would suggest that if we're going to November series with effectively status quo with a bit of guidance, then it is a risk. But
I appreciate the risk, what you're saying, so absolutely. But maybe at the November series we'll have an indication whether the public have taken up the guidance and are adhering to it. And if the guidance hasn't been adhered to, then we will have to look at a suspension. I don't know.
There's some Cook Minute and David level, there's some Beanie, Derek now.
Yeah, I think that would be sensible.
Misschien Cook Minute and Mason, but you have us cook tea and us chili dash on the 10 minuten. Har du ikke lyst til Ask na tees, well, leave out. I'm smoking culture in the gun the 3 point the hoon I was C as in political errors shen well. I was a B amendment I was shown at the college gemacht.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the amendment is that the Chief Officer, Assets and Infrastructure will issue guidance to existing community skip management groups and the general public, and that a report on the operation of the service be submitted to the next series.
Was you told to leis sit nest?
Yes.
Yeah, leave out. Fianna you are who's a be you go.
That gives time for
Aye.
us to see how
Okay.
about guidance is
Yeah.
taken on board.
Leave out. I hold it in your toilet to correct me, so Jonah, all right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Item dos nach bima ask. Khofat. Mo vision was is a numeri Leos is na herre. An ask shide pechke e roin is son vision was a numeri an a ski a woche tour I was to Siar Leos I was Bini David MacLeod is an ask gedist I was vier jerkes nach besuch traum met je
Thank you, Chair. This report is considering options for evening bus services for Broadway and West Side. These services were not included as part of the main contract. The Broadway, that's Point and up to Tolsta, public services are operated by Bus Nicola, and we have also the operator operating the West Side bus that comes in. They have been operating on an ad hoc basis. We initially thought that there might be a community transport solution, but that's not materialised. If anything, post-COVID, it's more unlikely that we'll find a solution through community transport. The contracts, main contracts, run from October through to September, and this report is looking to extend the current contracts to the end of March, so that as part of the budget reviews in February, we consider what happens in next financial year and onwards. So the two recommendations, the Broadway Public and the West Side Public, both to be continued to the end of March with a review in February 2024. Happy to take any questions.
Sheikh, wel kiestek te be. Cool, doshach. Chadig.
I fully support the recommendations to carry on these late evening services to March 24, and I hope they can be continue after that as well. But as you know, David, we've had issues with the NES evening services over the past couple of months. With it's a 16-seater that's on this evening service between Ness and Stornoway, and it also takes passengers from the West Side. And on quite a number of occasions recently, the bus has been full up, therefore passengers can't get on, and they have to have other alternative ways of getting home. Is there anything that can be done here to maybe get the operator to put out? I know previously he's put on a bigger bus when they've thought, say a 28-seater, when they thought they're going to be really busy, more than 16 passengers on it. It's happening more and more. And I think, as you say in the report, the free bus travel for under 22s, there's more, workers working in Stornoway from the rural areas, and they're taking buses home, which is to be welcomed. So is there anything that can be done at these peak times, but unfortunately the peak times seem to be, differ from week to week.
David. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Convener. Ideally, it would be good to have that sort of flexibility. We don't have it because we don't have the money. Basically, we don't have a budget. We're going from year to year on these services. The ones you refer to are partly included within the 7-year main contract, the run up to MES. It was operator design. It's included in the contract, and it's a 16-seater that's provided. There are provision in the contract for Hebkelt Fest because that's a known period of demand, and they put on bigger buses for that. But unfortunately, the size of the bus is determined by how much subsidy we pay the operator, and there's very little we can do without having additional money to pay the operator. I mean, it's not ideal to have more passengers than there is seats on a bus, particularly the last bus from town to wherever, from Stornoway to wherever. But the reality is any bus operator or any bus service that operates that has a specific number of seats, it's not up to the operator to put a bigger bus on if there's more people waiting. There's also no provision in the contract for a bookable service, which would again incur additional costs. So without a budget, there's not really a lot that I can do with the operators or even in-house. Although the one you're mentioning that has the problem, the in-house service is less likely to be a problem because we use the MIDI coaches all the time because we don't have many buses in the fleet that we have in-house. But for the operators who are running these services, the only way that they would increase the size of the bus significantly is if we were to pay them more.
What kind of increase would we be talking about, off the top of your head? I know you can't give me an accurate figure.
We have asked, and I don't have the figure to hand. I'm not sure whether we did get a price back or not, but we did ask how much it would cost. So I'm happy to speak to you individually about that. But it's, as you said, the demand is not consistent. It's usually ties in when there is something of interest in Stornoway, and it's not quite difficult to identify whether that is something it could be a small event, but it might attract a specific number of people that all of a sudden that 16-seater is overloaded, and it's it is difficult to manage that. And it's also difficult. I'm sure it's difficult for the operator to say, sorry, the bus is full, and you can't run a bus service with any more than he's got seats.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tablash.
Tolikal maarstafik is de maar goeie je pemmi urum figasen. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give my usual warning when I see the word non-statutory service, I mean, it's very good that we're able to continue this provision until the end of March, but I would encourage the service to continue dialogue with the community as to any feasible options in future that we might be able to support rather than deliver ourselves, because anything with the words non-statutory at the moment is subject to revision for the reasons you all know all too well. So I would encourage that dialogue with the community if that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
Sheikh.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to make some additional recommendations to the report, but first of all, I'd like to ask a question regarding the NEC scheme. And it's in the report that the scheme only reimburses 81.2% of the standard single fares for 16 to 22-year-olds and 43.6% for 5 to 15-year-olds. Do we have to pick up the difference?
Not. No, we don't. We don't make that's it's an equivalent loss of income to the operator. So what it means is you don't get the full value of the ticket. That's
So there are no financial implications for us in terms of
no,
scheme.
no. The fares are not. The fares go to the operator regardless of, but they don't get a full amount when it's a concessionary fare. You know, they don't get an equivalent back.
Okay, thanks. And just in the same vein as the chief executive, I think we have to continue and encourage discussion and dialogue with the community in terms of extending this service beyond March next year. I think you'll remember, Chairman, I sent you an article recently where our local community in Perthshire have, in a similar situation, worked in partnership with the community and with the local council, have been able to maintain a local service similar to what we're talking about here. And I think with further dialogue and partnership working, as was mentioned, a lot of the evening use of the service will be people who are coming home from work, probably from Tesco's and from the co-op. I think there's an opportunity for us to work with these companies perhaps too, and with the community groups in our areas, for example, that actually own minibuses and have actually received public funding to purchase these vehicles, that they could be put to use in some sort of way. So I'm proposing, if I can make an additional recommendation to the report, that the Comhairle engages with the Broad Bay West Side communities at exploring options to seeking a community solution to securing this evening's bus service beyond April 24. And a report is brought back to the November series with an update on how that dialogue and consultation is progressing, and that a further report be submitted at the November budget setting meeting in 24 with options for possible delivery of a new service. I can share this later on, that the Comhairle engages with the Broad Bay and West Side communities at exploring options to seeking a community solution to securing the evening bus service beyond April 2024, and a report is submitted at the November series of meetings with an update on progress, and a further report is submitted at the budget setting meeting in February 2024 with options on delivery or implementation. I think we need to explore, at least explore. I know the report says it's unlikely that a solution is possible, but have we really looked at it in depth in terms of looking at the viability of a possible community solution to this problem? Because I think the service is really important, and the risks are highlighted if this service is not continued. The risks are highlighted there about the withdrawal of the service. There's a risk of loss of employment for people if this means that transport is not continued. And again, in relation to a corporate strategy, which we'll be discussing later at PNR, it's right at the heart of it in terms of transport and connectivity and economy and jobs that are important elements of what we are trying to deliver. So I think we should at least make an effort to explore a community solution. And that is the purpose of this additional recommendation, which I hope will be acceptable.
I'm still to clear as you saying,
David. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Crichton. We're always open to a community solution. We have had a number of attempts at trying to get something off the ground. There has been very little response so far. I think what happens quite often in reality is that when a service is continuing to be operated, then there's an assumption within the community that it will continue to be so, going forward. When when there is either a risk or a definitive cancellation of service, then the community then engages and says, okay, this is serious, we're going to have to try and do something about it. I'm aware of the community transport scheme you're talking about. They've got 2 full-time drivers, 14 volunteer drivers, and a number of buses. It's a fairly significant undertaking. The cost of that scheme would dwarf what we pay in these 2 and it's alone, but that's not to say that the community in Broad Bay or the West Side couldn't come up with something.
Absolutely. I don't think it might not have to be replaced like for like, and that discussion has to take place with passengers and the community to see exactly where the need is and where the height of demand is for the service in the evenings. So that's all part of the dialogue and discussion that needs to take place.
Bruce, on Tuesday, John Orman.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of what I was going to say has been said, but just going back to, like Kenny mentioned earlier, there was a few people sort of stranded in Stornoway. Now, fair enough, adults look after themselves, but what about minors? Could we not give a wee bit of provision towards minors if they're sort of trying to get on the bus and they can't?
Sure, happy to come in. I mean, minors that are in Stornoway that are waiting for a bus that's already full, it's not the responsibility of the coroner, nor could it ever be the responsibility of the coroner. It's the responsibility of the parents, so or guardians. So it's not something that we or any as a bus operator, looking at it from a bus operator perspective, not something that any bus operator would ever take responsibility for because it's not their duty.
Thanks, Chair. I go along with what Councillor Crichton says, but I have a couple of questions. First of all, are there evening bus services in other areas in the Western Isles that have been funded from
the only areas that are currently receiving evening bus services are the 2 mentioned in the report, which are Broad Bay and the West Side, and also Stornoway to Ness, operated as part of the main contract, and also North Lochs. There's no evening bus service anywhere else.
Yeah, so really, there's still the Ness one is still being held on to, and so is the North Lochs one because it's in the contract.
It's part of the operator designed main contract.
I understand that, so that this was an addition to the contract, wasn't within the contract. Could I ask us, well, the second question is the usage of these buses to the West Side and to Broad Bay. If we could have a list of how frequent they are. Maybe you've got it in hand, David, but it's always a question of use it or lose it. It's.
If you look at I haven't put the tables are fairly enormous. We have data for every single day, and in 6.1 and going on to 6.2, there are numbers. They have improved a wee bit from last year. They've gone up probably 1s and 2s, and that's almost certainly due to the under 22 cards. And on occasion, as has been mentioned, that the last bus can be oversubscribed in terms of passenger requirements. But there's no easy way to either manage that or control it unless there was a big event on that the operator is willing to put a service on at no cost to us. That's what they would have to do. And as I said earlier, that's included for the Hebkelp Fest, but they know that they'll get fairly decent numbers.
Yeah, what I was referring to in the first question was that asking about the evening bus service in other areas. I take on board what the Chief Executive has said about non-statutory, but we also have to look at equity as well, equity of provision. So one area is getting something that some areas are not getting. So as a councillor for my ward, and Councillor Crichton would be the same, is that we would be fighting for our area to get the equivalent of, for instance, North Lochs and Ness are getting. I'm sure Councillor Finlay here, Stuart would be the same for point. So I'm just looking at, I understand the non-statutory element, but we have to as well, if we're putting these in, why on earth are we taking other ones out? And that's what I'm saying. If there is going to be savings of money, then it's got to be on an equal basis. And I say that, and to take the whole of an evening service, and there's 2 or 3 buses going down to Tolsta, taking that out, as Donald Crichton has said, the effect upon those who are working. And we've talked to many of them in our community who have said if they don't get this, they'll have to stop work. So we really have to look at some solution. And I take what Councillor Crichton is saying is that is something to explore. But maybe there's other ways of exploring if there was funding that we could move towards this as well. I'm saying that sometimes funding comes in, and we did even yesterday, we were mentioning about splitting up funding that we were getting from the Scottish Government. So I put that in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to widen the debate, but this subject is going to become even more important, I think, in future years. It's well known that attitudes to car travel are changing, that government is actively looking at road charging, including for rural areas. Those proposals are being developed. I think, without alarming anybody, the balance between private transport and public transport is going to become part of the policy scene in the next few years. So we can't do it alone with the budget we have, of course not, but the dialogue is going to be required, and the sooner that starts, the better, whether it's generally or on specific routes. So I just encourage the service to continue that work. I know they've not met with much response so far, and the points that are made about equity of provision are equally important. Thank you, Chair.
Mustafa.
Yeah, I think widening the debate around public transport, I think is important. And I think, we need to be careful not to talk about equity and replacing everything in every area, because I think public services in News and Barra don't exist during the day, let alone at night. So I think we need to look at all sides and not just one. Okay, thank you very much.
Arpalat Mustafa. Equity,
Always an argument. There's always an argument and a counter argument.
Sheikh an Molly in the Shenach, I was Lisha Bolga Huis, Don Yours, Sashenek, Shona, Ach, Fimet Pini, Stewie, Honey, Sonny and King. Will you look tollig to Lisha Shen? I should cut him on, was a vegetable David through. Right, gosh, in Cusper Tech and the Dia, where I did in a conio, I was the Shen cautious in Cusper, whom the Ash can has the hin. I was a shores on Fistrahu, Kish to be acting. Yeah, they were hitching a nest on the Dia, where it's on Perco Cusper Tech and the Pohorto, and half a